Слышно? Слышно? Отлично.
Вас слышно, но не видно. Камеру, пожалуйста, включите.
Alex, we're starting in 2 minutes. I appreciate your understanding. We will start shortly. Thank you. Окей. Да, начинаем. Dear participants, if you would allow me, then we should begin our today's meeting, side event organized in the Central Asian Pavilion. We are pleased to meet our distinguished delegates from the various countries or organizations, and also we have a quite large number of the participants who are joining us in this side event online. We appreciate your commitment and the presence at this meeting. In fact, in Uzbekistan, it's quite late hours. It's very much appreciated. So if you would allow me, I would introduce myself. I'm Jahangir Talipov. I represent State Committee of Ecology and Environment Protection, Republic of Uzbekistan, in charge officer for international relations and projects. Today at this side event, we are pleased to demonstrate our efforts in the field of biodiversity, establishing protected areas, and combating the impacts of the climate change and other initiatives that's taking place nationally and regionally. So with this, I would, with your permission, allow me to hand over the floor for Councillor from Mr. Alior Tilavo, Councillor Embassy of Republic of Uzbekistan in London. Mr. Tilavo, over to you.
Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, great. Dear friends, dear colleagues, it's very nice to see you all here in today's side event dedicated to climate change and wildlife conservation in Uzbekistan. For me, it's a big privilege to be here, present at the COP26 summit, and it gives me even more pleasure and privilege to be speaking at the pavilion of the Central Asian states. It's the first time this sort of pavilion has been organized in Central Asia, and we're thankful to Karik, who has done it, and hopefully this good tradition will be continued for the other years as well. Tomorrow we will have a high-level delegation headed by our Deputy Prime Minister, who will deliver national statements of Uzbekistan related to climate change issues, and I think you can learn a lot of more new things, new commitments, new initiatives, and new proposals from the Uzbek side. But the presence of the high delegation and the large delegation from the Uzbekistan side in today's meetings, I would say, shows it's one of the examples of high level of commitment from the Uzbek side to climate issues in Uzbekistan, in Central Asia, in the world at large. Why we are paying so much attention to it? I mean, we already know about this devastating effect of that change, the climate change issue, but in Uzbekistan, in Central Asia, we are being affected, I think, much more than compared to many other regions. I mean, and it's one of the reasons is because we already have a natural catastrophe in our region. It's drying up, dissemination of the RLC. So if you've got a couple of degrees of temperature warming up, you've got twice the numbers in Central Asian region. And recently, I think it was a week ago, 4 or 5 days ago, we had a huge dust storm in Tashkent and many cities of Uzbekistan. And according to some scientists, we didn't have it for the last 100 and 150 years. And our scientists think it's one of the effects of the climate change that is getting very, very worrying for us. And I can surely say that this issue is becoming one of the big national security challenge for Uzbekistan, and it was repeatedly stated by our president as well. So we've got an immediate effect. So at the national level, we are trying to respond to these challenges. I mean, we've got a high-level commitment by our president, by our politicians, our ecological organizations. We have a very good, we've started, I think, with a very good cooperation with our partners and neighbors in Central Asia. In today's pavilion is one of the vivid example of this. As far as I know, 4 or 5 days ago, for the first time, Central Asian participants made a joint statement of the Central Asian countries here. And I think it's a quite huge achievement. And also we're having a good relationship in a more wide international level. And one of the reasons for me being here is embassy also made some contribution to develop the relations with the UK organizations who deals with the issue of climate change and biodiversity conservation. And I think a couple of the representatives of the organizations from the Kent University, from Flora Fauna International are present today's side event. I think they can also speak a little bit about it. So thanks for giving me opportunity for these remarks. I'm very glad to see you all here, and I just want to wish success to this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lavov. With this, if you'd allow me, distinguished participants, allow me to invite for opening remarks the regional ambassador for Eastern Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia, the ambassador David Moran. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, great. Well, welcome to this event, and I hope that everybody is having a constructive and productive COP as we enter this second week. Many of you have been to many COPs and hope that this one is especially productive and successful with your help. I'm delighted to accept the invitation to give welcome remarks because I too was thrilled that you secured a Central Asian pavilion. We're here today to talk about Uzbekistan, but a large part of the progress of the last couple of years has been the way the whole region has turned both outwards and looked within the region for collaboration. And it's for somebody who has been working and living in Central Asian countries over the past quarter of a century. It's really wonderful to see this flowering. My role as regional ambassador means getting to know people not just in governments, but in the country, including young people, media, civil society. And it gives a chance to have a rich understanding of where you are, the opportunities, challenges, etc. Last week, there were lots of announcements by your leaders. And this week, as already discussed, we expect many more. We move towards a new emphasis on adaptation and nature. We talk about gender tomorrow, transport. There's still plenty of opportunities for Uzbekistan and the rest of Central Asia to showcase your commitment to climate action, which I believe is absolutely real, by signing up to statements on sustainable agriculture and food supplies, or zero-emission vehicles, to other initiatives which show aspiration and commitment. So I look forward to hearing the rest of this conversation. There's nothing more important as we look for the next year and the next years than protecting our shared planet. And the UK presidency now runs for another year. So I look forward to be working with you, with your colleagues in your capitals, including Tashkent. I've already visited 3 of the Central Asian states, including Uzbekistan, recently. I look forward to seeing all 5 again in 2022. And I'll now hand you back so you can hear more about the experts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your warm words and greetings to our participants. And with this, allow me to inform that due to the logistical issues, the Dr. Kazbek was not able to attend this meeting now with us, but he's on his way to the Glasgow to attend in following meetings. But as per our side event agenda, allow me to invite Dr. Boris Eresh, Director of IUCN Regional Office for the Eastern Europe, Central Asia, IUCN ICARO Office, for opening remarks to our participants. Dr. Boris, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Talipov. I hope you can all hear me and see me well.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. First and foremost, to say that it's a great pleasure to joining you today. I'm sitting halfway from Glasgow and Tashkent. Tashkent, I'm joining from Belgrade, but it's the good side of technologies that we can come together from different places. It cannot be more pertinent to have this event at the Central Asia Pavilion, Joint Central Asia Pavilion at COP, Climate COP, and to discuss the nexus between biodiversity and climate. We need more of such efforts. And this event comes approximately 1 month after Uzbekistan joined IUCN as a state member, the very first state member from Central Asia. which is very important. It is important for IUCN, it is important for Uzbekistan, but it's very important for demonstrating this strengthened commitment of the country and the region to join international processes. We do need government agencies. We do need academia, research, civil society organizations from Central Asia to join this discussion. We've already heard about the sweeping impact of climate on Central Asia. We know that global warming in Central Asia is above average. We know that 1/3 of glaciers have already melted. We know all the issues that happen in the region. For that reason, we really need discussions like this, tailored discussions to see what can be done in order to protect better, really rich biodiversity and rich natural resources in the region, to manage in a more integrated way, and to restore when it's been degraded. I won't dwell much on the RLC. We know what has happened there. What we have to do now is to draw lessons from what happened and to see how can we recover as much as possible. What is really positive is to see this increasing cooperation across the region, as we cannot tackle climate, biodiversity, and also health crisis that we are living through alone. So for that, we really need cooperation. We need cooperation across sectors, and we need cooperation across national boundaries. So for that reason, the strengthening cooperation has cooperation over the past years, and this pavilion as a clear example of it, it's really a positive sign. What we also have to look into is to see what is climate induced and what results from the way how we manage natural resources. As what IUCN is really trying to stress, that there is a lot of it is also man-made. So we cannot blame just climate change for everything, but we also have to look how we do manage resources. For that, we need knowledge. For that, we need capacity. For that, we need institutions. For that, we need cooperation. And all that is something that IUCN is supporting its partners in Uzbekistan, but also supporting its partners in Central Asia. So once again, great pleasure and great privilege being here. I very much look forward to a fruitful and open discussion to see how can we strengthen our policies, but how can we also turn policies into action. Thanks once again, and I wish you all a very fruitful meeting today.
Dr. Boris, thank you for your warm words and wishes to our participants. And I would like to once again echo that, as you mentioned, in October 20th, Uzbekistan was officially became officially the IUCN member state. And with this, we appreciate the IUCN Secretariat and the team for this the honor to be a member. And as mentioned, this is the beginning of the new chapter and the new cooperation, and we see as a IUCN as a strong, solid partner for implementing IUCN's recommendations, expertise, knowledge, best practice in the field and in the field of the biodiversity conservation and protected area management and overall nature conservation in the Republic. And we are open for possible initiatives and cooperation with IUCN and our partners. So with this, we have crossed the opening part and the opening part of this session. And if you'd allow me, I will go briefly this presentation on the Uzbekistan's activities in the field of biodiversity and climate change. I'll be doing the presentation. So if you can, I hope you can see the screen. Given the time limits, I'll try to be short and consistent. So I represent, as mentioned, State Committee of Ecology on Environment Protection. Next slide, please. And Uzbekistan is a member of the major environmental treaties and conventions. I won't be naming them. Probably you know all these treaties, agreements, international multilateral documents and agreements. So, SDG, in 2015, Uzbekistan has also joined those SDGs and identified targets and committed to for all this fulfill these requirements and obligations under these conventions. Next slide, please. And the State Committee of Ecology, as the name stands, we are responsible for the various environmental matters, nature conservation, water, air, land pollution, flora, fauna conservation, protecting and managing and establishing in new protected areas, conducting environmental monitoring in various aspects of this environmental conservation and natural resource management. Next slide, please. And over the past years, we have developed solid basement of this legal documents, long milestone setting documents, and those naming few would be a concept of environmental protection until 2030, the strategy on biodiversity conservation for the period 2019-2028, the government resolutions and on the improving the environmental monitoring in the Republic of Uzbekistan, strategy for transition towards green economy for the period of until 2030, and various other legal important documents has been approved and set to ambitious goals and targets have been identified. And apart that, allow me to mention that in 2020 we have received Uzbekistan's third environmental performance review that's prepared by the group of international team from UNICE. It also particularly comes with good policy recommendation and analytical report covering the aspects of biodiversity, climate change, and all other environment related matters. Next slide, please. And Uzbekistan has committed in very high level to environmental conservation and natural resource management, and it's been at the statements of our presidents in the General Assembly. In all these three statements, it's been always mentioning the environmental issues. And 2072, we'll have seen this, the condition of the map of RLC. And our country leader has once again drawn global community's attention for this important but yet very global environmental catastrophe of RLC. And in 75th of session, His Excellency President Mirziyoyev has suggested to adopt special UN resolution declaring RLC region of ecological innovation technologies and emphasize importance of this decision. And 2021 in May 18 in General Assembly panel session has approved this resolution, special resolution declaring RLC zone of ecological innovations. And also in a recent statement towards the global community, the president has once again drawn attention for this importance and the Uzbekistan's commitments for combating climate change, protection of environment and biodiversity, and Paris Agreement commitments. So once again, draw the global community's attention for the environmental matters and the biodiversity. Next slide, please. But all these statements also followed with real on-the-ground actions, meaning that since 2017, Uzbekistan has started massive afforestation activities in this dried sea bottom of the RLC, and nearly 1.5 million hectares land has been afforested and planted with desert plants and saxawals and others. And large amount of human resources, technical equipment has been mobilized in the region of RLC to plant the seeds, so it reduces the dust emission, toxic dust emissions that's been case for many years in the RLC bottom. And next slide, please. Uzbekistan and we said Committee of Ecology has been identified a quite ambitious target on increasing the area of protected area from the from current below 8% until 12%, nearly doubling the area of the protected areas. So we are ambitious on this, and we plan to bring the share of the protected areas towards the country area until 12% by 2028. And this would and with this we believe it will help us to conserve the threatened species, biodiversity representatives, and this ecosystems of Uzbekistan. Next slide, please. And I'm delighted to share with you that it's recent news that UNESCO's Man and Biosphere on September 2021 during the 33rd International Coordination Council at the UNESCO on Man and Biosphere program, Lower Amu Darya State Reserve has been included as a MAP program, and it's been a good achievement. And it's because it's very much unique ecosystems rich with threatened Tugay forest, riparian forest, and it's a habitat area for the many bird species and Bukhara deer and the endemic Bukhara bear. And we appreciate support of our colleagues from Zuko Foundation and German partners for preparation on this nomination dossier and for all this continued support on this milestone. Next slide, please. And also in November 2020, Uzbekistan has established a new national nature park in South Ossetians with a coverage area of nearly 1.5 million hectares, vast open landscapes in the western part of Uzbekistan. You can see on the map, it's a pristine ecosystems that's home for the Kulan and other many plant and plant species and the fauna representatives. So next slide, please. And another achievement is in February this year, we have established new state nursery, Sudoch at Petke, which is also located in the western part of Uzbekistan. It's a home, it's mixed terrestrial and wetland ecosystems, which is home for the many endemic species, but also it's an area for the important area for the migratory routes for the many other migratory bird species occur in this area. It's been designated as a new site protected area, but also we plan to designate it for a Ramsar Convention site as a global areas for global important wetland areas. Next slide, please. And going to the Ramsar in September 2020, Uzbekistan has designated its third wetland of international importance. It's Tudakul and Kuymazar water reservoirs has been listed in this, and it's the third Ramsar site in Uzbekistan that have been accepted, listed for the Ramsar Convention, and it's also home for the many migratory and endemic species and migratory species of the region. And next slide, please. And with all these designations, ambitions, which we haven't stopped during the challenging pandemic years of 2020 and 2021, that we continued our efforts to establishing, designating new sites, but we do clearly recognize the importance of introducing and applying the modern technologies, digital technologies, and using photo traps, applying best of practice of the GIS tools and remote sensing in this, managing these areas, protecting and conducting monitoring of these vast open landscapes of these protected areas and the sites. So we closely work with our colleagues from the UNDP and other international developing partners. We appreciate their continued support in this regard. Next slide, please. And we are keen to establish our environmental conservation. It requires a constant introducing best practices, establishing cooperation, and using the best practices from the globally. In that, we are very much keen to enhance our cooperation with our partners in regional scale, in the national and globally. So we work with the various leading international organizations in the field of nature conservation and beyond. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide, please. Next one. I would briefly touch base the projects, that's ongoing projects with our partners in the. It's focusing on the strengthening the resilience of Central Asian countries by enabling regional cooperation and access to glacial naval systems, with focusing on the climate change issues in the glaciers. We work with, there's ongoing project on sustainable management, natural resources and forest resources in key mountains regions to protect biodiversity. This is a regional also initiative, and similar projects also running in the neighboring states, but we appreciate UNDP's support in this regard. It's very much focused on the protecting this important habitats, and the snow leopard is a key species of this the project covers, and it's not only about conservation, but also comes with the educational part, because in the framework of this project this year, later this year, we plan to open the two site visits that aim to not only develop the ecotourism in the locally, but also will focus to serve as a educational purposes that for the local communities, for the tourists and others. So I think my colleague later on in the agenda, Mr. Abbasakada, will also mention these activities. And Uzbekistan also active participant on the other regional initiatives like Central Asian Mammal initiatives, the Central Asian Desert initiatives, which we have also representative for today's meeting from Jupo Foundation, Mr. Jens Wunderlich. And also I would like to mention this GIZ initiative on the regional ecological oriented development project in Aral Sea Basin. It's also a bilateral project between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, aimed also to improve the habitat of this Aral Sea area, to combat the crisis and improve the livelihood of these communities and biodiversity conservation. So, and also let me mention last but not least, one of the very interesting initiatives that's taking place in Central Asia. It's a program for the mountains of Central Asia Biodiversity Hotspot, funded by Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund with a budget of 7 million. It's implemented by the World Wildlife Foundation of Almaty office. And it's also very key part of this project is providing small or medium-sized grants for the local communities, scientific communities, towards this protecting this for the activities on the biodiversity and in KBA areas. So next slide, please. We are particularly delighted with the ongoing and growing cooperation with Global Green Growth Institute. That's Uzbekistan has agreed that the host country agreement has been signed in May 2021, and with that, Dr. Aaron Russell, country representatives, has been dispatched for Uzbekistan and started his activities with a big project on the focusing on green rehabilitation project in Karakalpakstan region to address the Aral Sea crisis. This is funded nearly $6 million grant funded by the COICA, but also this project is aimed to mobilize additional funds from the global climate GCF to fight this climate change impacts on the Aral Sea area, that also supports various other activities focusing with biodiversity. And next slide, please. We, as mentioned by Mr. Tilavov in his opening remarks, Uzbekistan is very much keen to establish cooperation with leading international organizations in the field of environment and nature conservation. And to that, we are proud to mention this. Over the past years, we have established good cooperation and growing cooperation. And this is not only the signing MOUs or formal meetings, but also the cooperation is ongoing. There's with this organization that you have seen. I won't be naming them because there is pipeline projects under the preparation, and will be some are started, some will be soon launched. And as also mentioned, Uzbekistan also became a IUCN's member state, 92nd non-governmental member state. And with IUCN, we also look forward working in various projects and we are already working with them in the projects focusing with biodiversity and land degradation restoration. And next slide. And with this, I thank you for your attention. I thought it was a brief about our activities on the biodiversity field and some in relation with climate change and others. So I would suggest we leave the question or discussion part for the last, as indicated in the agenda, and we go with the next speaker, whom I have also mentioned in my presentation. I think we have to give the floor. Professor Joseph Bull could, from the University of Kent, could take the floor. Joseph, are you with us?
I'm with you. Yes. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, Dr. Joseph. Yes. Over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this extremely important event. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm going to just discuss briefly for 5 minutes or so one of the projects that links to the ongoing collaborations that Mr. Talipov has just mentioned. So my name is Dr. Joe Bull. I'm a conservation scientist working at the University of Kent at the Durrell Institute, as mentioned. And I'm going to briefly talk about a new project funded by the UK government's Darwin initiative that we've just kicked off. The project partners include the State Committee, as mentioned, and many others within Uzbekistan. It's an Uzbek-UK collaboration, including the Institute of Zoology, the Academy of Sciences, and the Ministry of Sport and Tourism. The project's called, sorry, Resurrection Island, Enterprise, Conservation and Development around the Aral Sea. So we've already discussed the Aral Sea. A number of my colleagues have already mentioned the Aral Sea, and I think almost everyone who's listening now will know about the Aral Sea and the ongoing crisis there. So I won't talk about it at too great a length, but clearly the Aral Sea has gone from one of the largest inland seas in the world and the source of thriving industrial fishing activity and many other activities to the current day, where it's almost entirely disappeared from the face of the earth. And I think that's well known and established. The project that we're focusing on is one of many projects looking to reverse and revitalize the Aral Sea loss. The project is focused on Vozrojdeniya, or Resurrection Island, which used to be the island in the middle of the Aral Sea, and as we all know, is now connected to the mainland. And that is really the focus. Geographically, that's the focus point of the project I'm going to talk about today. And clearly, the loss of the Aral Sea is exactly the kind of issue we need to deal with and grapple if we are to meet the broader aims of COP26. If we're to meet these necessary aims of mitigating climate change and adapting to climate change, and doing so in the most effective way possible, which often involves working with nature, then the Aral Sea is a perfect example of the kind of problem we need to address. We know that there's been substantial impacts upon, obviously, people, but also biodiversity in the region around the Aral Sea as a result of the crisis, but also regional climate change and local climate change is a major problem. The colleagues from the IUCN already talked about regional climate change in Central Asia, but local climate change in the region around the Aral Sea is accelerated by the changing environment there. And you can even see that in the data recorded from the surrounding areas. And this just shows how mean annual temperature has changed in the region around the Aral Sea over the last few decades. You can see the trend just inexorably upwards. So climate change is also a problem, and it's one that's linked very closely to the loss of nature in the region. And as was talked about throughout this conference, throughout the COP, one of the best tools we have available to ourselves to mitigate climate change is to protect nature and to reverse the loss of ecosystems. And so the project that we have, this Resurrection Island project, is really focused first and foremost around protecting the remaining nature, partly for biodiversity's sake and partly for the people who live there, and finally also to mitigate any further contributions towards climate change. So there's despite the loss of the Aral Sea, there's thriving wildlife in and around that region, not least species like the critically endangered Saiga antelope, which is one of the flagship species for conservation in the Aral and surrounding region. And so part of our project is focused on creating new protected areas, working with obviously all the partners that have already been mentioned to establish new protected areas around Resurrection Island to protect the nature that lives there. Not only to protect nature, but to provide an opportunity and a focal point for new initiatives around tourism. And clearly there's huge opportunity for ecotourism as a way of providing increased revenue to the communities that live in the region around the Aral Sea, but also as a way of making sure that nature conservation is sustainable in the long term. So one of the focus points, as I say, is about nature conservation. And the idea is that by preserving these unique ecosystems, we not only preserve the biodiversity there, but we prevent the further greenhouse gas emissions, which of course exacerbate climate change. The opportunities there for tourism don't only link to nature. There's all kinds of interesting elements to the surrounding landscape. And that could be geological interest. This is an example of the so-called dinosaur eggs. I'm afraid I don't know what the Uzbek name is, but I don't think they've actually been named yet because they're still under research and discovery. These are geological features around the Resurrection Island that have been caused by millions of years of sand accumulating. So there's obviously geological interest. There's interest in the fact that the Aral Sea remains extremely low light pollution, so there's lots of opportunities for dark sky tourism there as well. This is a picture I took in the field just a few months ago. So there's beyond tourism for the sake of wildlife, there's also all these other attractions as well. And finally, the landscapes are stunning, and the sea itself remains beautiful despite all the bad press around the Aral Sea in terms of its disappearance and the disaster that's involved. The Aral Sea itself remains a beautiful place to see and visit. So there's huge opportunity there for example, expanding tourism and doing so in a way that's ecologically and environmentally sensitive to provide value into the region. So that's a big part of the work we're doing. Another element of the project, though, is recognizing and working with industrial partners in the region. And obviously, there's a huge amount of industrial activity in the Aral Sea and the Ustiyut Plateau and the surrounding regions in Karakol, Pakistan. Not only extractive sector industrial activity, but also expanding transport infrastructure, tourism itself as well. All of these sectors clearly have impacts, potentially environmentally, unless those are managed. And so part of the project focuses on saying, yes, we need industrial activity, we need economic development in the region to benefit the people that live there, to bring in jobs, to bring in sustainable income. But also we need to do so and develop in a way that ensures that impacts are not there's not overly strong impacts upon the environment in the region. And so with our industrial partners, we're looking to mitigate impacts upon local habitat and make sure that the outcome of industrial activities aren't the kind of thing that you see in this image, where habitat has been stripped, and clearly not only from a biodiversity loss point of view, but the impacts upon the release of greenhouse gas emissions are problematic if this is the result of industrial activity, just to clear habitat entirely. So partners are looking to find ways to restore and reverse habitat loss in the region. And this is an example of an in-progress effort to revegetate parts of the landscape that have been lost, not the Aral Sea bed, as my colleague Mr. Talipov just mentioned, but the areas around the coast of the Aral Sea, which have lost their vegetation and are now being revegetated in an effort to restore biodiversity, but also to mitigate climate change. And the end goal is to leave the plateau looking the way it used to look. This is another part, slightly more remote part of the plateau, and this is how the plateau can look, green and lush, if it's fully revegetated and restored. And clearly from this picture, you can imagine the benefits this brings to biodiversity, the benefits this brings to people who live there, and also the benefits this brings in terms of climate change mitigation. So I'm going to stop there. I just was going to give you a very brief idea about the kind of project work we're working on and the collaboration we have. Again, thanks for your time. My name's Joe Bull and my contacts are here, and I'd like to acknowledge our collaborators. And I will now pass the floor. Thank you very much again for inviting me.
It's our pleasure, Joseph. Thank you for your very interesting and illustrative. The photos are stunning. Now I want to go accompany you next time you visit Nukus. I will join you.
You're very welcome.
I couldn't do it last time, so apologies, but this next time. So let's plan jointly. Thank you for your intervention, and we are once again express our sincere gratitude for the government of Great Britain for this grant, for this project that's been funded by the government of Great Britain. And we look forward to working with you alongside with our colleagues from Academy of Science and other relevant stakeholders and for this fruitful and successful implementation of this project. Thank you for your interesting presentation. And with this, I would like to give the floor for head of the Protected Area Department from Mikhail Zhukov Foundation, to Mr. Jens Wunderlich. Jens?
Thanks a lot, Mr. Talipov. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. Thanks a lot, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's also to me a great honor to talk to you here in the Central Asian Pavilion. It's great that you made it. Also thanks to Karek and to Goscom Ecologia for organizing this and for inviting me. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce you to some of the implications and impacts we have had and still have in our ICI-funded project Central Asian Desert Initiative, in short, CADI. It's funded through the International Climate Initiative from the Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety in Germany. The project is implemented in 3 countries together with the governments of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, and jointly implemented with consortial partners of the University of Greifswald and the FAO. It's running since July 2016 and is coming to an end next year already in June. Just to give you a brief overview what we are talking about, I mean, most of you are from the region. So the cold winter deserts in the global perspectives, we can say in Northern America and the Great Plains, there are some parts of cold winter deserts. There are some in Southern America, in the Patagonia region, but the major share of the cold winter desert are distributed in Central Asia all over. That's also where the major responsibility comes from for the governments to protect these unique environments. 95% are situated there, while there are 4 distinguished differentiation of cold winter deserts in Central Asia, depending on the climatic conditions, on the altitude and vegetation patterns. But in the CARDI project, we focus most of all at the terranean deserts, which are covered by the commonly and famously known Karakum Desert, Kysukum Desert, Ostiot Desert, and the newly formed and famous Arakum. So a peculiarity of the cold winter desert in Central Asia are we can call Saksa-Ul forests or woodlands. So large areas formed by Saksa-Ul communities. So they are can also be called as desert forests. So they are formed of Haloxylon persicum and Haloxylon amadendron. And their certain feature is that the above ground biomass is almost the same as the below ground biomass. So it means that if you're seeing a Saksa-Ul tree or bush, you see basically only the tipping point of the iceberg. It might be even more biomass below ground than you can see. So that also means there's a huge carbon storage within, and that has also implications here to be addressed at the COP and under the climate convention. It also has implications to combat desertification, as you can imagine. So it is preventing erosion process as long as the Saksa-Ul communities are in a natural state, in natural conditions. So talking about the carbon storage, we did surveys in the research in the recent years. So most of all, Zuko Foundation together with Greifswald University, but there are also other researches. But it says there is an enormous amount of carbon stocks in Central Asia, so ability to store as long as the ecosystem is in a good and natural condition. So, but you can also see that the major distribution of cold winter deserts is here in Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. So here also comes the major responsibility from to protect these ecosystems, these deserts. Having a further look, basically there are no 2 means to address the conservation of these deserts. One is the typical conservation approach. Uzbekistan did really tremendous good work in the previous few years. So it established in Northern Ostiot here the Zaigachi Landschaftlicher Kasnik. It's an IUCN 1B category. We could support here a bit with preparation and implementing monitoring guidelines and also providing some training on wildlife monitoring, including camera trapping. Then only last year, the Southern Ostiot National Park has been implemented. That's really lots of work that is really appreciated, and appreciation to the State Committee of Ecology of Uzbekistan. But there are also more in planning, as most of you know. So one is the establishment, Mr. Talipov mentioned already, the Central Kysukum is planning to be established, but also protected area in Vazrashdenie, as Dr. Bauch right now already said. Just last week, it has been also received evidence of Saiga antelopes. You can't barely see it, maybe here at the picture, at Vazrashdenie, which is really extraordinary finding, because so there are really few findings or few observations of Saiga antelopes. Only in recent years, I don't know, some weeks or some months ago in Zaigachi somewhere found with camera trapping, but it's really few in Uzbekistan. It's a critically endangered species under IUCN, but the population is growing, and here comes also responsibility to further do protection. And again, Uzbekistan is doing a good job here. But not to forget about, I also would like to praise here the government of Turkmenistan, who just some years ago established also new protected area in the central Karakum, Bereketi Karakum. And yeah, right. And we are also supporting the government of Kazakhstan to implement a protected area here in southern Ostyot in Kazakhstan. So then we would really have a transboundary national protected area network to conserve biodiversity in that Ostyot region here. Showing you this map is also to raise your attention that we are currently also working under CADI to elaborate a World Heritage Site, World Cold Winter Deserts of Turan. That includes 7 component parts. All of them are shown here at this map. It's Repetek Biosphere Reserve, it's Bereketi Karakum and Gablankir. It's in Turkmenistan. In Uzbekistan, it's this newly established Southern Ostyot National Park and Zaygatchi. And in Kazakhstan, it's the Vaza-Kamesta-Bavenik, which was used to be the island of within Aral Sea, and Alten National Park. Why we are doing so? Because we believe that that this is be an incentive to increase the efforts in conservation and in protected area management. And there's also more evidence in several studies. IUCN stated that the cold winter desert is basically the only biome worldwide that does not have yet a World Heritage, UNESCO World Heritage site established. So the only biome, so you have to imagine. That was one approach. The other one is facilitating and promoting sustainable use in the cold winter desert, in the desert forests. As you can see, so also from our surveys, we can say that there are only about 25, so 1/4 of the area still existent from the Saksa-Ul woodlands throughout the Turanian deserts. So that means 75% approximately have been lost, and even the remaining are to some kind degraded. But still there's hope. As you can see here, Nomos Jumayev, and he's living in Sukhandaya province in Uzbekistan. He was taking care for several years for his plot he's managing, and could show that it's possible to rejuvenate in an ecological way these deserts. So there's still this potential to regenerate these deserts, and we can also show that there is an increase, an enormous increase in biomass production, so also in carbon storage. Remember, also it's not only above ground, but also below ground. And he received from the president of Uzbekistan also the National Award Hero of the Deserts. So, almost. In order to facilitate and to bring this into at the policy level, and to also to long-term establish this conservation and sustainable use efforts, we initiated under CADI the establishment of the Desert Secretariat. The Secretariat is has been elaborated also a program of work that has been adopted by the target countries and the member states, governments of Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan. And the national focal points are as well at the same time the focal points to the UN conventions, CBD, CCD, and UNFCCC. In this respect, I also would like to raise my appreciation to Uzbekistan having updated the NDCs. That is really an important step to come up with more ambitious NDCs, because only with ambitious NDCs there is a good chance to raise international funding in order to tackle all these challenges Uzbekistan is facing ecologically and also under the climate change issues. So we are also elaborating at the moment a NAMA in order to tackle the issues on sustainable use of the deserts. And the NAMA has only a chance if a country has been submitted ambitious NDCs. That's why my thanks to the government of Uzbekistan for doing so. So I'm done already with my presentation. I hope it was not too long. If you would like to see more of this, of the desert and also of the beauty of the desert, we were supporting the YouTube channel Syokak Ufsfere. Have a look. They produced 4 movies only about the deserts of Uzbekistan and I believe also Kazakhstan. So have a look at this. And then happy to join further the side event. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Mr. Jens, many thanks for your very interesting presentation. Indeed, winter cold deserts of Central Asia, they're one of the unique ecosystems that globally, and something that we have to really conserve, and it has increase the awareness of the local of nationally and also globally on these unique ecosystems that occur in Central Asia. And also, on behalf of State Committee of Ecology, once again, allow me to thank the Zuko Foundation team and experts for the continuous support, for the trainings, for capacity building activities, and many, many more that the foundation is offering for State Committee of State Committee and to the Uzbekistan scientific community. So I thank you once again. And with this, let's move forward, and allow me to invite for the floor Mr. Abbas Ahadov, project manager of the UNDP State Committee of Ecology joint project funded by Jeff on and his presentation was topic on promoting adaptation measures to increase ecosystems, biodiversity, and resilience to climate change. Mr. Abbasika, over to you.
Thank you, Jahangir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe good evening to some people joining us from the other parts of the world. My name is Abbas Khadov. I'm currently, as was mentioned by Jahangir, managing the UNDP and GEF, as well as the Uzbekistani State Ecology Community project on conservation of mountain ecosystems. This project is, as was mentioned, is funded by the Global Environmental Facility and is being managed and run and supplied by the UNDP, and is being implemented jointly with the State Ecology Committee. So I'll try to be as short as possible, considering the time I have. Yep, thank you. So shortly, the project objective is to basically enhance the conservation and sustainable use of natural resources in the high altitude mountain ecosystem of Uzbekistan. Pretty straightforward objective to achieve, and it's built upon several outputs that are interlinked with each other for the achievement of this objective. And in the picture, you can see the cry out of the snow leopard. No matter how much we love them or care about them, cherish them, this might not be sufficient, as it might sound trivial as it is, but an action is needed nowadays, and the changes is also very necessary. Firstly, the project focused on landscape level planning and management decision making. Within this component, the project basically engaged in collecting basic environmental data on land use types, on land cover, as well as covering the land use changes and land cover changes within the snow leopard landscapes of Uzbekistan. Basically, the project focuses in two landscapes, snow leopard landscapes in Uzbekistan, which are Western Tianshan, that is the western northwestern part of Uzbekistan, which is basically Tashkent region, and the Pamir-Alai snow leopard landscape, which are basically the southern part of Uzbekistan. That are two regions, Surkhandarya and Kashkagar regions of Uzbekistan. Within this component, we mostly focus on research activities, doing the snow leopard research and monitoring, engaging in, as was mentioned by Jahangir earlier, establishing or camera traps, doing analysis, species identification, as well as comparison. And a lot of trainings have been conducted for the stakeholders and beneficiaries on the sites, as well as for the other expertise at national level as well, for provision of individual expertise support, capacity building, and institutional capacity building, specifically for the snow leopard research and monitoring activity. And this activity, snow leopard research and monitoring, has been implemented since 2018. There have been some drawbacks due to COVID-19, which is basically struck all of us in doing our field activities. And the next is for increasing the efficiency, on the spot efficiency, decision-making purposes and landscape level planning purposes. and online platform information management system has been developed by the project and is operational in the meantime, which is called BCIMS, and it stands for Biodiversity Conservation Information Management System. It has 7 types of environmental data on biodiversity, in particular on flora and fauna, on land use types, and for example, forests, pastures, protected areas, and some information and data on infrastructure, specifically for settlements that are located closer to the important or key biodiversity areas, specifically in the snow leopard landscapes of the country. Within this component activity, there have been a lot of work done on, for instance, apart from doing the basic field research, we have also carried out a lot of economic assessment of ecosystem valuation as well, which has not been a great important focus of the project, but in order for public awareness and educational purposes, we have carried out such activity and has came out as a very important information has been gathered, and it's being proposed for use in the future and further planning activities and for other economic activities within the landscapes of the snow leopard in Uzbekistan. The second component activity that the project is focused on is basically strengthening key biodiversity areas. Those are PA expansion. As I have mentioned in the first component, we have identified key biodiversity areas, and specifically, in particular, the areas where the snow leopard location has been spotted. And considering these findings and tools, we have drawn up the maps and proposals on expanding protected areas of Uzbekistan, creation of new protected areas where the snow leopard population has been observed. Basically, the focus of the expansion focuses on, in the Western Tian Shan, if we want to talk about in detail, the provision of ecological corridors where of 2 isolated sites in the Western Tian Shan, which is actually the UNESCO map site, and creation of a new, for example, protected area in Pamiralai to cover the upper reaches of the Tupalang River, which is located in the Sukhandara region. So that's basically about the protected area expansion. And within this component, we have also developed and introducing digital and nature-based solutions. In terms of digital, we have been applying testing the smart patrolling system in the 2 pilot protected areas in the mountain ecosystems, one in Western Tian Shan, another one is in Pamiralai, snow leopard landscape. And those, as most of you are aware of, the smart application, Cybertracker, that has been updated to a smart mobile recently. And this is a very user-friendly, efficient tool to increase the efficiency of inspection and range of patrolling work of the protected areas that we have been working. But in perspective, the smart patrolling system, as has been mentioned by a colleague Jahangir, this is going to be upscaled and replicated to the other protected areas of Uzbekistan in the future. In terms of nature-based solutions, the project of course, works with the existing protected areas in the mountain ecosystems, where a lot of technical support or basic material technical support has been provided, where we upgraded certain inspection cordons, houses with usage of renewable energy to support climate change adaptation as well. So those are the basic, and of course the project is also engaged in, as some other projects have presented, in developing the nature-based tourism in the mountain ecosystems for various purposes, aesthetic purposes, of course, with minimum capacity required, and for biodiversity financing activities in the future. And in terms of education, this component is within this activity, we're engaged in working with the local communities living in the snow landscapes in Uzbekistan. That calls for working with primarily with the teachers, with schools, school kids, as well as the community leaders and the community members themselves as well. So pretty good progress has been done in that regard, and the project is still ongoing. We have a lot more to do in the future as well. And within the next activity is sustainable economic development incentives for communities. And this component activity basically focuses on pastures, forests, and livelihoods. But what about pastures? As you know very well, the mountains of Central Asia, including Uzbekistan, are very much subject to degradation due to, at some places, it's overgrazing, and in some countries it could be undergrazing. For example, in Kyrgyzstan, it's undergrazing has been observed. But in Uzbekistan, it's basically overgrazing, and the climate change effect is also has affected the status, the current status of pastures as well, because we have a few little precipitation, less precipitation than we used to have before. And that is also an impact, and it calls for adaptation measures to sustainably and more smartly use and manage the pasture ecosystems within the snow leopard landscapes. And within that perspective, we have been working with the local communities. For example, within the project, pasture law has been adopted in 2019. And within the pasture law, there is clause on establishment of pasture use associations, and the project has piloted the formation of pasture use associations for these communities within the snow leopard landscapes, and has been quite successful. And now we have expanded the project focus, and we are working with pilot forestry business units, enterprises within the snow leopard landscapes that are basically that surround the protected areas of highland ecosystem of Uzbekistan. And the forestry sector has also X amount of, well, in total it's 288,000 hectares of pastures that the forestry sector has in snow leopard landscapes, and geobotanical surveys have been carried out, and sustainable management and use of these pastures have been provided, and trainings have been conducted, and the work in progress in the meantime. In terms of forests, and of course, the pastures regeneration is also being implemented. We have been engaged in restoring the degraded pasture areas, established a set of plant forage breeding nurseries within the forestry business units, and that is supposed to increase to support to restore degraded pasture areas up to 110 hectares per year. So the next is the forests in the mountain ecosystems. The project is mainly engaged in identifying the degraded forest patches, and as well as restoring the degraded forest patches. For that purpose, as with the example of the pasture areas, we have established set of tree nurseries, and we are practicing restoration activities according to the project objectives, targets. We are supposed to restore 1,000 hectares of forests, and in the meantime, this target has been overachieved. We've restored up to 2,000 hectares of forest, degraded forest patches in the snow leopard landscapes. So it's quite an achievement and a good contribution to climate change mitigation, and of course, the enrichment of the snow leopard habitat in the future. and the livelihoods as well. The communities living inside or within the snow leopard landscapes definitely use the benefit from the natural resources that these ecosystems provide, and basically they are pastures and forests. And we have been piloting micro, low value grant projects within these communities for provision of alternative income generation opportunities, like creation of orchards, pistachio, walnuts, almonds, or any type of crops that are suitable for their specific climate or geographic area. And as well as other alternative like activities or skills development, like establishment of other service centers or engaging in other activities rather than focusing much on natural resource use. So in the next activity is focusing on promoting cooperation and collaboration, and primarily it's all about transboundary cooperation. In the meantime, we have similar projects on snow leopard conservation, the mountain conservation in Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan project has been recently finalized, and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyz Republic have the similar projects running, and these projects are supporting the establishment of transboundary cooperation on snow leopard conservation and in Pomerania and Western Tanshan landscapes. In the meantime, 3 countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan has joined this initiative. The memorandum of understanding has been endorsed, but the Kazakhstan officials are reviewing the MOU, and it has to be finalized end of this year. So it's succeeding pretty well, and we should have a good outcome, and that could also support the CMS objectives on increasing the transboundary cooperation of migratory species. So another activity within this component is training on CITES. We have conducted and still conducting trainings with legal forces, with border security officials on illegal wildlife trade. So this has been going on. Another important activity of this component is the snow leopard conservation action plan for the next 10 years. This action plan has been recently endorsed by the government, and it has a lot of activities and objectives to be achieved in the next 10 years. Most of which the project has supported and is supporting still. And it has a lot of other aspects as well, ranging from the research to the protection of the ecosystems themselves, as well as the climate change issues, and further collaborating opportunities as well. And in terms of resilience and the climate change, certainly, as I have mentioned earlier, the adopted climate change puts it very clear that the snow leopard habitat has to be studied further, and it calls for further work, and mitigation measures should be studied, and what kind of mitigation measures can be proposed when depending on the analysis of the trends of the habitat change, and as well as how the climate change impact is taking place in terms of towards the snow leopard population dynamics. And these are very important questions in terms of climate change mitigation, adaptation, and the biodiversity conservation, provision of resilience towards climate change. And these are kind of are provided in the action plan, as I have mentioned, and they're pretty good opportunity for further research and work in the future on biodiversity conservation, climate change mitigation. Thank you very much for your time. Hope I didn't take much of it.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Abousakia. So very interesting presentation. Indeed, this is one of the projects which has so many different activities in working with communities, implementing new digital technologies, geodatabase, etc. Apart mentioning that project is supporting with establishing new ecosystems of site visit centers, etc. So, and plus, I particularly very much fond of these studies, the case studies on this payments of ecosystem service, and of course we can speak a lot about this project activities that are ongoing and supporting these communities and biodiversity conservation. But we have very much limited time, and we have slightly exceeded the timing we planned. And with your permission, I would like to invite our next speaker and the last speaker, I would say, Mr. David Gill from the Fauna Flora International. Speaking about the upcoming initiatives in Uzbekistan in the field of biodiversity and climate change. David, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes, David, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. We've really appreciated support initially from the Uzbekistan embassy in London, which has helped to connect FFI with many conservation players across Uzbekistan. And we appreciate the support of yourself, Mr. Talipov, as well, to help bring these forward and to create this platform today to learn about other projects in Uzbekistan and the region. So thank you very much for that. I'm also aware that my presentation now is stopping people in the UK from their dinner, and it's stopping people from Uzbekistan of going to bed. So I'll try to keep it quite brief, should hopefully just be 4 or 5 slides. I'm really keen to introduce to you some new work that we have planned in Uzbekistan and across Central Asia as well. And the focus of my presentation is on wildlife trade. So it's probably the presentation that's least directly relevant to climate change, adaptation, and mitigation today. But as we all know, with climate change, it affects and is affected by everything. So there are some clear links that we'll explore here too. And the organization I work for, Fauna and Flora International, it's an international NGO based in the UK. We've got a team at COP. So you may, if you're in Glasgow, you may see some of my colleagues there fighting very hard to put nature at the center of climate change decision-making. Across FFI's work across the globe, we make huge contributions to climate change mitigation and adaptation through the habitats we work to protect and restore. But as I've discussed today, talking more specifically about wildlife trafficking here and our plans for this, like climate change, wildlife trafficking is also a problem that can only be solved through regional and international cooperation. And very much a key issue for biodiversity conservation in Uzbekistan as well. So very quick bit of background. Most of you know this already. Illegal wildlife trade in Central Asia has caused some of the steepest declines of any species worldwide. So from a global conservation perspective, when we think about wildlife trade, it's often primates or tigers, lions we think of, but species in Central Asia incredibly affected by wildlife trade too. Declines in saiga conservation from principally through poaching, but other factors too. Cost declines up to 90% of the population at one point, although now recovering. We know other species such as steppe tortoise, Seika falcons have been incredibly affected by trade in recent decades, nearly disappearing from some parts of their range. And then also things which don't make the radar, such as medicinal plants. You talk to any botanist across Central Asia, they will know countless of species which are slowly, or even sometimes not so slowly, disappearing from their habitats as incentives to trade those species increase over time too. Of relevance to COP, we know illegal trade weakens the ability of these species to adapt to climate change. We know for many of these species, the battle against climate change alone will be a tough one. Will they be able to adapt in time? Will they be able to move and follow climate change, or will they have the genetic variability to adapt? Large-scale trade certainly doesn't help. Taking tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of these individuals out of the ecosystem, massively weakens their ability to adapt to climate change. So it may be that if you solve one part of the problem, that helps, but if large-scale trade continues, these species will be increasingly vulnerable to climate change. It also, uncontrolled, unsustainable, illegal trade also denies the potential for long-term sustainable use. So species such as saiga, steppe tortoise, sacred falcon have long been used. Depending on country, there is some use for some of those species. There are plans to restart use for some of those species too, which are very much under discussion in certain countries. But as long as illegal wildlife trade remains an issue which is uncontrolled, that the case for sustainable use becomes harder and harder. And sustainable use too of these species may well play one important livelihood strategy for climate change adaptation options across Central Asia. Drivers of wildlife trade, Central Asia has a particularly difficult challenge to address wildlife trade. It's close proximity to many major consumer geographies. So right in the doorstep of Europe, where a lot of the steppe tortoise trade goes to, right in the doorstep of the Middle East, where a lot of the falcon trade goes to, and of course, very close to China and Southeast Asia, where much of saiga horn is transported to too. So lots of trade, vast international borders, which are difficult to police effectively, and relatively limited funding too. Again, wildlife trade in Central Asia isn't something that's in everybody's at the front of everybody's mind in the conservation community, but we know it's a huge issue, and relatively low prioritization to deal with this issue outside of the traditional government agencies, which know it's an issue. Obviously, it's an issue for several government agencies across Central Asia, and the priority of wildlife compared to other crimes tends to be still quite low. So I was invited just to give a flavour of what we're planning over the next 3 years. We're grateful to have two new sources of funding come through from the UK and the US governments. That's the Illegal Wildlife Trade Challenge Fund, supported by UK's DEFRA, and from the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs from the United States. Between these two projects, between these two funding streams, we'll be supporting work in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan to varying levels, recognizing that each country has slightly different needs and slightly different priorities. We're tailoring our activities accordingly. And the intended outcome of this work is to support law enforcement agencies to build their capacity effectively, both to better detect wildlife in trade, but also to build capacity to how to respond and prevent wildlife crime from happening in the first place. And also, as touched upon by earlier speakers, to promote collaboration within and between these countries, recognizing this is a complex international issue. Broadly, 5 objectives I'll touch on briefly here. So we have a first objective all related to data management, recognizing that data on wildlife trade is messy. Different agencies, different states, different bodies collect this data in different ways. It's hard to get a consistent picture which actually effectively informs law enforcement on the ground. So our first objective is to build that capacity to better collect and analyze data and promote sharing of it where that's appropriate. Second objective is to raise priority levels across government, across these 4 countries, to really recognize that wildlife trade is a key issue, not just for biodiversity conservation, not just even for climate change, but also as a national security issue too. Thirdly, we will have a component of work really focusing on building capacity on the ground of law enforcement officers. So learning from what the data is telling us in objective 1, we will try to target law enforcement officers based in the critical trade routes and hotspots across the region. We're planning training sessions on how to detect wildlife in trade, to provide law enforcement officers with training on how to respond once a seizure is made. So how to gather evidence effectively, how to share that evidence, how to document it, etc. We're also planning work on SMART. So really interested to see UNDP's ongoing work in Uzbekistan. And I know there's going to be huge potential to collaborate there. We've had a long-term program in Kazakhstan supporting our partners ACPK with SMART deployment there. So we're looking to find ways to share the expertise across the region. Also work on sniffer dogs. So also through our partner in Kazakhstan, ACBK, and the customs agency there, we've had a long-term program of supporting at the time, which was the first ever regional program for sniffer dogs trained to detect wildlife species. And there's currently 19 sniffer dogs across Kazakhstan working to detect signs of saiga, Seiko falcon, steppe tortoise, bear, etc., as they go through international borders. We've also got a focus on building prosecutorial capacity, recognizing that solving wildlife crime not only depends on more effective law enforcement, but also depends on that whole chain going all the way through to actually supporting prosecution and making sure those responsible for prosecution have access to the evidence and information they need to do so. And then fifthly, we're also going to introduce crime prevention strategies, increasingly recognizing that it's ultimately not just about detecting wildlife trade once an animal has already lost its life and once somebody has already committed to crime, but to increasingly promote amongst law enforcement agencies, but in communities too, and amongst the NGOs working between that space of how to promote crime prevention, how to raise awareness at the kind of the most strategic points in place and time to minimize the chance of somebody choosing to take part in wildlife crime, how to inform how law enforcement patrols work so that they're providing a deterrent to crime happening in the first place rather than catching it afterwards. So we'll be doing some seminars on that topic over the next 3 years to raise awareness of those techniques. Second, lastly, just to recognize this is a huge piece of work involving multiple partners. In Uzbekistan, the State Committee for Ecology and Environmental Protection has been fundamental in getting this project off the ground and bringing partners together, and we'll collaborate with a very strongly throughout this program. We're also working with the Institute of Zoology as a strong technical partner, and with the NGO Ecology, who are supporting coordination of many activities on the ground. And I also list a host of other partners working in the other 3 Central Asian countries with us on the slide, and many more which couldn't fit in the slide. But it's a complex project, lots of partnership with government and NGO partners. And I hope I did my best to make that as quick as possible and to not keep you any further. Thank you again to the State Committee for Ecology and Environmental Protection for this opportunity. And thank you also to our funders, the Illegal Wildlife Trade Challenge Fund and USINL, for supporting all of this work. Thank you.
David, many thanks for your presentation. And as I think it's great to see so many regional international partners being involved in such a project activities. And as we know, the nature does not know the border, so we should we should not focus on one specific local issue, but work globally. And because we know many species are migratory, and jointly put efforts on the conservation on the species and work together in cooperation. So we welcome such initiatives. We always stand by it for cooperating with the neighboring states, with international partners and other NGOs and organizations. So many thanks for your presentations. Colleagues, I think although we have drastically extended the timing, the agenda, but we could still perhaps take a floor for those who might have some questions to our speakers. I see one in the room. Over to you. Maybe you should need to take a microphone. And while we are waiting for the question, I would kindly ask our distinguished speakers for today's side event to send me your presentations, maybe in the PDF format, so we could later on share among other participants. Yes, we have the floor. If you could introduce yourself and your questions, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Kata Rahmat. My name is Saxon. I can hear myself. My name is Saxon Bosworth. I'm researching the Aral Sea and making a documentary series about the restoration projects. So naturally, I found all of the presentations fascinating. So thank you so much. I would have a number of different questions, but as obviously we're short on time, I wonder, and this is to any of the speakers involved today, here in person or online. Firstly, I wanted to ask about Saksal. Now, obviously, in Uzbekistan, there is coverage of, I believe, 1.2 million hectares of Saksal, mostly in Karakalpakstan. I wonder, has there been any studies on what biodiversity lives within a developed Saksal environment? So what other species of plant and animal life can exist there? And then secondly, I wanted to ask about Tugay, which has been mentioned a couple of times in presentations. I understand that in the Amudarya Delta, there were great expanses of Tugay, and it was actually the home of the Caspian Tiger some decades ago. I wonder, are there any specific projects that are going on in the Amudarya Delta region to restore Tugay and promote the ecosystems that exist there? So thank you so much. And if anyone, any of the speakers want to nominate themselves for those questions, thank you.
If I may, I would take the chance to answer, but I welcome our distinguished participants, anyone who might have better knowledge to respond to this question. So first question, let me go with the second question. On Tugay, you have mentioned, indeed, this is our main concern as a governmental agency for nature conservation, and it's there has been a number of the projects ongoing, introducing different practices on conservation, enhancing the protection. But one of the things, as I mentioned in my presentation, that we have designated this area to the UNESCO Marine Biosphere Reserve. We have established the Lower Amudarya Biosphere Reserve in order to really increase its importance. So we could also additionally mobilize international expertise, additional grant funds or other resources, so we could jointly focus on this area, on the importance of the Tugay riparian forest, Tugay forest, which has been severely threatened over the past decades. We all know this. And you have mentioned the Caspian Tiger. Indeed, it has been part of our discussion recently with our, when we conducted trip to the bilateral meetings with World WWF representatives, senior representatives, where it was part of the conservation project to reintroduce Caspian tigers or cheetahs, also predators in Central Asia, because a similar project is happening in Kazakhstan on introducing the tigers. You probably know this. So we have discussed, but it takes years of conducting feasibility studies, conducting the assessments on the preparing needed infrastructure, expertise, local staff on preparing the prey and all the food chain. So it's complex of work, which we have initially started dialogue just recently, and we will be going towards this such a project. And I think this will be a big project. We welcome our international partners, experts to give us approaches or give us their advices. We welcome and so on. So did I respond, or anyone else who would like to from our speakers? I see the hand raised from the Jens Wunderlich, Zuko Foundation.
Yeah, I'm just few comments. So unfortunately, as you know, the Caspian tiger is extinct, and the cheetah is only some few species left in Iran. Yes. So basically, there are almost no natural predators in the riparian forest, the Tugay forests. That means, so even though the Bukhara deer is a redless species in Uzbekistan, the population is really huge, and the few remaining forests still existing. So it really demands progressive wildlife management in order to keep the balance of species, because at the moment the Tugay forests are in a critical, let's say, state, because too many deer just are browsing too much juvenile populus species, so tree species basically. So that's a problem and demands really managing. Maybe a good progress is, I think Mr. Talipov mentioned it, that in Lower Amu Darya there has been established a biosphere reserve at the national legislation of Uzbekistan, but also since July this year, also recognized internationally by the UNESCO. So there is progress, and I'm really looking forward that the government of Uzbekistan is also taking steps for wildlife management there, because it is really important to remain and keep the last few patches of Tugay forests. Yeah, maybe keeping it with that, not to exceed the time we are having.
Yep, and going back to your first question on the saxaul plantations, it's been massive campaign of this planting saxauls, as you know, and our inspectors are always regularly on the place, the inspectors of the State Committee of Ecology, and they have been reporting the various activities of wildlife in these areas. Even a few times occurred the group of the saiga antelopes, which were in the areas which they were not reaching before. So I think this is the subject, something we could, be happy as environmentalists, such activities happening, but it needs regular monitoring of this fauna representatives in the region. So it's hard to say judgment that yes, we have restored the biodiversity in this region. No, I mean, it takes time and monitorings. So any questions? Please, over to you. Yeah. Pass the mic.
I must comment, there's so much of interesting work which is being done and being planned. I'm particularly keen on the proposal that I think FFI mentioned about illegal wildlife trade. That's a very interesting project. Just curious, maybe I missed it, but I didn't see many partners in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Is that so, or did I miss it out? I'm so sorry if I did. But I would love to see the list of partners, because it's something that a lot of organizations are working in different capacities, and I think this project does have a very good scope to kind of thread them all together, so that, because let's face it, illegal wildlife trade is not something that can just be stopped by making a few good actions. It's something like, if good police could stop crime, then Scotland Yard would have ensured there would be no crime at all. So it'll be fascinating to see what the approach is to rope in these other partners, other organizations in other countries. I saw in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, I probably missed out the Tajik and Kyrgyz partners in that.
Yeah, actually, Mr. Dave mentioned that he couldn't fit all the Actually, a colleague from the FFI has mentioned that he couldn't fit all the partners. I think he could also speak for himself. David, you with us?
Yeah, thank you. And it's a fair question. I also was on that slide for a few seconds, so you probably didn't quite get a chance to scan all the way through. But initially, in both Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, we'll be working very closely with the National Academy of Sciences in both countries as a key technical partner, and we'll also be obviously working very, very closely with the relevant state agencies with responsibility for the environment as well, and hopefully customs agencies too, as key collaborators. We're also aware of other institutions working on wildlife trade in Kyrgyzstan, such as Pantera, Ilbeer, Snow Leopard Trust, etc. too. So we are designing our proposals to complement and fit together with those other organizations as well. But happy to share. I know time is short now, but happy if we can share details after this meeting. Happy to share more information about other partners and our plans in those countries.
Wonderful. I think another question from the floor.
Hello.
Yes.
My name is Guljan Yermekova, and I'm from Kazakhstan. I'm researching Aral Sea Basin. So my question is, first of all, I'd like to thank you for this fascinating, very comprehensive presentations. I am very glad to see all those wonderful projects that are taking place in Uzbekistan and other Central Asian countries. So my question is related to water allocation in Central Asia. So, do all those projects somehow positively influence the water allocation that could positively influence to the share of water use by biodiversity and the ecosystem. So I know that population growth rate is very high. I mean, in Central Asia, and economic demand is very increasing. But at the same time, so we know that biodiversity conservation, ecosystem restoration needs sufficient water. So how do you tackle these challenges? So does these plans include this water conservation initiatives and some other initiatives? Thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions. I'll take to respond. Oops. Yep. Here, there is as you mentioned, there is a number of projects taking place in Uzbekistan and regional. So each of them have their certain, goal, objectives, and targets that they follow. And among all this project portfolio that we have, there's certainly some that are aimed for this focusing on the conservation on the wetlands and water matters. Particularly, you may remember from my presentation that I have mentioned the GGI, the Global Green Growth Institute project funded by KOICA on the green rehabilitation project in Aral Sea. So this is one of the projects that's aimed to introduce this water saving technologies, drip irrigation, etc., for the farmers, for local communities, but and also mobilize additional funds for this creating needed infrastructure. But apart that ongoing project, we have just like a few weeks ago, we have received financial approval for another project that will be with State Committee of Ecology and jointly with UNDP UN Development Program of Uzbekistan office running in Uzbekistan, in Pakistan also, on specifically focusing on sustainable management and the conservation of the wetlands, lakes, and ecosystems in Aral Sea. So this is a $4 million US granted project by Global Environment Facility. This one will be particularly focusing on the water and the wetlands, on the ecosystems, or in aquatic ecosystems. So and we welcome all and there's also, probably about the WAVE project that's funded by US government, the USAID. It's also a regional project on the water awareness and vulnerable environment. This is particularly focusing on the ecosystems, water issues. It's a regional project funded by US government. So there's a number of initiatives. We could talk more broadly about them, about each of them, based on my knowledge and the information that we have. And with some, we have the direct involvement. With some, different in different connections. So I hope I could respond to your questions. And if there's some more questions from the online participants, we could text on the chat or take the floor, raise your hand. I don't know, or just take the mic and ask the questions. Otherwise, I think it was quite, we have exceeded the timing than we initially planned. We are still here, Uzbek delegation. We are here in the Central Asian Pavilion, and we welcome all participants to approach us anytime and ask questions. And we're happy to discuss and respond to your questions if you do have. And others, you could write on the chat, and we will follow up with some response as soon as convenient. So once again, thank you for all participants for this participation, for your questions, and our distinguished speakers for dedication their time in this event. And one message that I would like to send from today's meeting: we, State Committee of Ecology, and we, Uzbekistan, we stand by. We are open for the cooperation. We are happy to discuss our cooperation opportunities and mobilize our efforts for this nature conservation, but biodiversity, and increase our resilience under the climate change impact. So I thank you for your time, honorable participants, and until next time, and thank you. Video audio? Oh.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That's